I've been pleased to talk recently about a certain audio scandal featuring good guy, Mend It Mark, and bad actor, Tom Evans. My first video, linked below, exposed the actions of Mr. Evans to ridicule. Some commenters didn't get that, but hey. My second video explained reasons why it's a serious risk to talk about the matter publicly, both in terms of YouTube takedowns and potential legal costs. Also linked below. Basically, Tom Evans' Master Groove preamp costing £25,000 UK pounds, which equates to $31,558 US dollars and 75 cents as of today, was considered by many viewers and commenters perhaps not to be worth that kind of value. I'd keep an open mind myself because there's no way I could afford that. Maybe the audio performance is so fantastic that, should it have any shortcomings in other areas, it is worth 30k. Who knows? But along the way my mind turned to wondering what kind of features and performance a preamp for moving coil cartridges should have, if it is to fully justify a $30,000 price tag. Genuinely worth $30,000. So let's dive in. Clearly, audio performance is king. A moving coil cartridge outputs a tiny voltage, less than a millivolt, less than a thousandth of a volt. Clearly, this is going to need careful handling if the output is not to be little more than noisy, distorted mush. So, feature number one would be fabulous audio performance. By this I mean distortion at a level that is inaudible. A flat frequency response from 20 Hz to 20 kHz. No, let's say 50 kHz, in case you have a Lyra Atlas cartridge. A noise that approaches the theoretical limits imposed by the laws of the universe. This is known science. While there is almost always scope to design something that achieves better, your $30,000 preamp should be as good as the existing best within a very tiny margin. This is science, I'll stress that, not magic or voodoo. But we can dig into this a little deeper. I think an audiophile would be disappointed if their $30,000 investment bought them an electronic design lifted directly from a datasheet. Yes, base it on the datasheet or use it for inspiration. Then build on it. By build on it, I mean pay attention to every detail that affects audio performance, that could affect audio performance, or that takes the audio performance just that little bit beyond what even the most sensitive audiophile is able to hear. For $30,000, we don't just expect attention to the details that matter, we expect attention to details that go beyond good enough into the more than good enough zone, and perhaps into that's crazy, no one's going to hear that. So where do we start? I'd say the power supply, because if that doesn't supply ultra clean volts and amps, something's wrong that's going to have to be put right later, which I don't think is a good way to go. So maybe my preamp should have an external power supply. What this gets us is that mains electricity, 50 or 60 Hz AC, doesn't enter the case of the preamp itself and dirty the air with electromagnetic radiation. Call this controversial if you like, but the power supply should be able to handle whatever mains you throw at it, within the power company's specification. If you've ever looked at mains on an oscilloscope, don't do it because you'll probably die, you'll be shocked at how dirty it can be. It should be a nice, smooth sine wave, but life gives us distortion, spikes, surges and sags, noise, ripple, asymmetry, frequency variation. And when I say whatever mains, I include the mains cable. Audiophile, mains cables, come on, that's nonsense. So the power supply sends to the preamp itself perfectly smooth DC in volts that don't twitch, sag or anything else but flat line, and amps available in overabundance, more than could ever be needed. Let's go inside the preamp itself. I'm not going to be completist here, but I'll mention a few things a $30,000 preamp designer should be thinking about. Components: resistors, capacitors, transistors, op amps. Clearly they all need to be of the best quality possible. And of course, all the designer has to do is look at the datasheets, find out which are best, then source them. Once again, this is science, not magic. One might look at the publicity materials of various equipments and see proud boasts of German or Japanese capacitors. Well, unless the best capacitor manufacturers are located in these countries, it doesn't mean a damn. What does mean several damns are how accurate the values are. Do the values degrade over time? Are they prone to failure? The designer should be looking for numbers here, not marketing opportunities, unless they're science-based. Resistors obviously should be high precision, even when they don't need to be. $30,000, remember. Transistors. Of the thousands of different types of transistor available, there will be one that is best for each particular purpose in the circuit. And transistors come in grades. Nothing but premium will do. And you won't just take the factory's word for it. A $30,000 designer will hand-select transistors for the best performance, and also hand-match them where they're used in pairs or multiples. Similarly applies to op-amps. A $30,000 designer should be using the best, even in places where the best isn't necessary. We're talking costs here. A bog-standard op-amp costs pennies. A high-performance op-amp, tens of dollars. Don't worry, there's still going to be plenty of profit down the line. At this point, I could branch out into tubes, valves if you like, but this would be such a long story, I'll leave it for another day. Components are one thing, putting them together on a circuit board is another. I know from my own experience that there's such a thing as a good circuit board design and a bad circuit board design. I also know from my own experience to make sure to switch the etching tank off after use. So, signal paths, crosstalk, grounding, optimization, testing and improvement. A schematic does not a circuit board make. Or, a schematic is the map, the circuit board is the terrain. Or, the schematic is the dream, the circuit board the reality. There's some sayings for you. Components, circuit boards, they need to be put together. Now if you buy, say, a low-cost Class D power amp, such as have been very popular on YouTube recently, you'll expect automated manufacture, and the circuit boards will look properly neat and tidy. I'm not sure that our $30,000 designer will be able to improve on this. Comment me if you have further info. But what can Mr. 30K offer to the dedicated audiophile is hand soldering, or hand assembly if you like. In reality, I doubt that this is going to be better than automated methods. But for 30K, we want something special. This can go two ways. Mr. 30K can hire an expert at this. I've watched wiremen at work, and what they do has a quality like jewellery. I suspect that there are people who can assemble a circuit board and make it look like an electronic Fabergé egg. Or Mr. 30K can do it himself. Assuming he's competent, he'll get a perfectly functioning result. But it might look a little homespun. It could be a way to go and justify value. What do you think? Here's a thought inspired by you-know-who, which designer and which preamp. Wouldn't it be nice if there were a neat internal wiring loom? Or if wires that needed to be separated for crosstalk reasons, then some elegant means of support, not just dangling. Just a thought. Back to business, and I know there's a lot of detail about the internals that I could have covered. Let me know if there's anything you'd like me to focus in on in a future video. The case, or cabinet I might even call it. Enclosure, I am not. One of the functions of the case of any audio equipment is to shield out electromagnetic fields. And there are a lot of those. There are hundreds of digital TV channels going through your head right at this moment, even if you don't subscribe. What we want from the case is overkill. $30,000, remember. I'd be inclined to suggest that at this price point, any electromagnetic shielding should be internal, and the outer case should be, wow, look at that. So I'm thinking some kind of premium grade alloy, carbon fibre, composite, and of course designed by a designer of such high-grade things, not merely a box. I've noticed outside of audio that when things are made to precise tolerances, CNC milling and that, they can look very impressive, particularly if there are mating parts, like maybe a flap over the controls. So yes, we'll have that. Hidden screws and fasteners, we'll have those too. Let's worry about vibrations wobbling those robustly constructed but sensitive circuit boards and components, and have internal damping. And of course vibration isolating feet. Come on, let's have fun with mass spring system resonance calculations. And I'm going to say that if there were dashpot damping, the marketing department would go to town on that. Heatsink. I don't think a moving coil preamp is going to use enough power or waste enough energy to need one. But why not go that extra mile and have some fins round the back, or wherever? I don't think they'd even have to be efficient, so they could just look like a 57 Chevy maybe? I think our case is coming along nicely, but it also needs a beautiful finish. Anodizing, powder coating, laser-etched lettering. Beauty should be in the eyes of the beholder, who has just spent a whole lot of money on this. Oh, and since we have internal electromagnetic shielding and thermal control, let's make the case out of beautifully grained and polished wood. Coco Bolo. So again, among my points about the case, there's so much more I could say. Commenters, what's important that I've missed? So, the preamp looks good outside and in and performs close to the limits of physics. Do we have $20,000 worth of value yet? So we need that last $10,000. Where can we get this? Well, without this last $10,000, the previous $20,000 is probably worth a lot less. 5 maybe? I'd say that's value for what I've described to someone who can afford it. The last $10,000 is what I'd call the feel-good factor. Don't think that this isn't a real thing. Think luxury car brands. They know how to work this. One feel-good factor is the reputation of the designer. Oh dear, someone recently made a grave mistake here. But I'll give you an example of someone I met, now deceased, unfortunately, but he talked the talk, walked the walk, and put himself out there, magnifying his brand and the brands he worked with. Tim de Paravicini is his name, and I got to talk with him at length about his 1-inch stereo tape recorder, optimised to run at 18 inches per second. That's a whole other story, but his clear dedication to audio at the highest standard, and his strong opinions of anything that wasn't up to par, well, I'd say that's an example of an audio designer who could add quite a few Ks of feel-good. I think that's maybe top of my feel-good list. Second might be customer interaction and support. For 30k for a preamp, pre-sale, one might expect to be able to talk to the designer himself, at least interact by email. Post-sale, one might expect advice on setup, interaction with other components, general hand-holding in fact. OK, it's a 30k preamp, not 100k. You wouldn't expect to talk at length on a daily basis, but you would appreciate a relationship and to be able to ask a quick question when you need to. I don't have any particular order now, and I'm cherry-picking what I'd consider to be important. Brand heritage. This is worth a chunk of change. If Mr. 30k designer is new to the market, well, he's going to have a lot of convincing to do. I'm not saying it couldn't be done. But suppose the brand had a 15 or 20-year pedigree with online forums packed with delighted owners. There's a lot of value in that. OK, I'm going to have to leave it to my commenters now. There are so many points I could cover, but I'll leave it to you to comment what you think is important. What would justify $30,000 for a preamp on the assumption that you could afford it? Or what would justify, say, $1,000 of that 30? What one feature would add $1,000 of value? And one more thing, do you already have a $30,000 preamp? Tell us all about it. See you soon.